Well, I guess the Steam Machine was delayed, but does that really matter? You can just build your own. Build your own out of a lot of different options. Let's build our own Steam Machine and or commiserate about the apocalyptic levels of difficulty acquiring technology, and like things are weird and different, and it's hard to get RAM and parts and everything else. So there's options. This here is an 8000 series Intel system, but it'll game just fine, even though it's made out of kind of obsolete parts. But that's not where we're going to start. Let's start by talking about your options and Linux and all this other kind of stuff. Now, first off, I've got a Linux channel, and I like talking about Linux things. I've been kind of quiet lately, been kind of busy working on some other stuff. Stay tuned for some content there. But this is for you folks that are transitioning from other things to Linux. So we're going to talk about this in a general sense, and also the Steam machines. Valve announced Steam machines. If you're living under a rock, this is from Valve. They're going to give you hardware that runs Steam. Linux-based. It's a foregone conclusion. Linux-based. We don't know that for sure, I suppose, but it's basically going to be a mini PC. It looks like it's not going to be modular, and it looks like it's going to have some kind of cool features, but it looks like it's not going to come in at the price point that Valve was originally hoping because of, the global macroeconomic situation. It all started with this, the Steam Deck. This is based on Zen 2. Zen 2 feels like it should be obsolete, and the first earliest incarnation of RDNA. This has been a runaway wild success, and it runs Linux. It's a handheld game that runs Linux. To give you an idea of how absolutely just completely insane and insanely successful this has been because of the experience that it delivers, Lenovo also did an AMD handheld. That one was based on Windows. It has done so poorly that Lenovo has basically abandoned driver support for that. Yeah, so that thing is going to have way less longevity than this thing because Valve is dumping tons of money into software support and everything else to sort of bring that forward. There are a lot of folks that have the skills but not the time to make the experience in Linux really dramatically better. But the experience in Linux with something like this is already pretty good. It would not be a bad idea for one path to a living room Steam machine to just be a dock for a Steam Deck. You can use this with remote play for something like a desktop computer, a full desktop computer, and then you're running with the graphics horsepower here, and this is really just used for a front end. You're not even really using the graphics in this thing except for hardware accelerated decompression. That is an option in this video. That is something to talk about. There's also some chatter we'll have about form factor in just a minute. But these machines in front of me, I want to talk about those. So let's move on. Strix Halo. I did some videos. My favorite Strix Halo machines are 128 gigs, followed by 64 gigs. And at one point I told you 32 gig is probably not a good idea. In the winter of our discontent, 32 gig Strix Halo could be a good choice. I've got a Strix Halo machine from Minis Forum. I've also done a review of our Strix Halo from Framework Desktop. We were offering some killer deals on systems with memory, and Framework has really handled themselves well. It's like, hey, we already have this inventory. We're not going to mark it up excessively, but we are going to market, we are going to raise the price a bit to deal with the fact that memory prices are absolutely bananas insane. And so Framework has done the most uncompany-like thing ever. So Framework Desktop, Strix Halo, if you're thinking about a Strix Halo build, check that out. And also our GMK Tech. So for this video, I ultimately opted for the GMK Tech Strix Halo build. And this one is only a 64 gig version, which is great for balancing different things, but also the 32 gig version wouldn't be bad. The nice thing about Strix Halo is that it's all one unit. This is all there is. This has DisplayPort and HDMI, lots of USB connectivity. It is relatively quiet. It is running Red Dead Redemption and Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and you can basically get 60 to 90 to 120 FPS at 1080p, depending on your graphics settings, and 60-ish FPS at 1440p. It's not really meant to play 4K gaming, but that is all local, self-contained. It's running. You can build a Steam machine. This is running Bazzite. Bazzite is the Linux distribution everybody can get behind and do stuff Get the whole level 1 forum to help you in your transition from Windows to Linux. A lot of success stories. If you want to spend some money, and this is more of a premium solution, Strix Halo. If you want to spend some money, this is the Encase M1. This is an older one with our Arctic cooling. Now this has an ASRock ITX motherboard with a 7600X. 7600X. This is the lowest cost AM5 CPU that I was able to get my hands on. It was even cheaper than a 7600 because sales and secondary market and all that sort of stuff. I don't know if you can see it in there, but this is also using AMD's stock cooling, which doesn't make any sense. Like if I were building this, I would not use an Encase M1. I would put this on a cardboard box and use a better cooler. So anyway, we'll look at the benchmarks from that in just a second, but this is something that you could build. If you're gonna build this and optimizing for dollars is what you wanna do, you'll probably use a full ATX motherboard that's cheaper. You'll probably use a full ATX case that's cheaper. You'll probably use a full-size ATX power supply that's cheaper. You get what I'm going? But this looks really nice in your living room. So you've got options. Now this handily outperforms Strix Halo. Now, both of these systems are quiet enough for a living room. Our Encase M1 build, fair bit louder, a lot more fans in it. Just the GPU has more fans than the GMK Tech. The GMK Tech does have the P mode button, which will give you more performance, and that is a little loud for a quiet living room, but in the configuration now, I mean, it's been on and running with Shadow of the Tomb Raider on a custom high, almost highest preset, and yeah, it's not drowning me out. The air conditioner's louder. Some of what is driving the migration away from Windows to Linux is because Microsoft has decided that there are certain minimum hardware levels. Officially, you could run the Windows 11 on the new versions of Windows 11 on 8th generation Intel, but not every motherboard has a corresponding platform and BIOS update to be able to support the TPM and protection machinery that is needed for the operating system update. Microsoft has sort of waffled on this a little bit, and it was really wild too, because they're like, oh, we're going to support 8000 but not 7000 series. And from a instruction set standpoint, that was almost indefensible, not quite. I found a couple loopholes, but I thought it was really weird because it's like the 7000 and 8000 series, same motherboard. This is an 8086K, 8000 series. This is an ASRock Z390 Phantom Gaming with an Intel 8086 and a Titan X. Yes, the Titan X flagship GPU from like 5 years ago. This is an entirely reasonable, actually pretty decent gaming machine. An 8086K can run all of this stuff on Linux. You can actually breathe new life into machines, these older machines, with a Linux-based operating system. If you are a complete noob, Bazzite is probably a good choice for you. You can get a lot done with it. There's a whole potpourri of Linux operating system choices that can help you make the transition. Bazzite is pretty cool because it is this idea of trying to make your Linux machine a finite state machine. Not really, but having it be in one of several defined states. And so when you install a package or you change something, it's in a defined state. A lot of the time, bad experiences with Linux, like when I meet folks that are having trouble, what has happened is they try to solve the problem themselves, and they find an answer somewhere and they try to implement that, but that answer doesn't apply in their situation for reasons that they can't really be expected to understand, that require deep lore and years of experience doing something. And if that doesn't solve their problem, they tend to just leave that. It's like, well, it didn't immediately break anything that was obvious, but it also didn't solve my problem. Let me just move on to the next thing. And so their system will accumulate those little changes that don't break anything obvious, but also don't help them solve the problem they're trying to solve. And the reality of that is that when they go later to do things, then something else doesn't work, and it was because of a change that they made earlier, and they don't have the experience or know-how to know to connect A to B. Bazzite kind of solves those problems by having your machine try to be in a relatively well-defined state. So when you install something or you configure something, that lives as an explicit piece of configuration, and you don't really have as much room to color outside the lines as you do in other distros. It's almost like a paint by numbers in terms of configuration and everything else. And that finite state of the machine makes it easier to troubleshoot because the command to do the thing can rip away your preferences and reset it to a known good configuration, which is basically all Windows does anymore. It's like when you have trouble with Windows and it's like, oh, let me apply the troubleshooting assistant for you, and it resets your preferences. You got a Windows update, and it's like, I've configured it not to spy on me and not to advertise in the start menu. And the Windows update's like, oh, let me help you with that by turning that off. No one would want to turn off web search in the start menu. That's absurd. And it turns it back on. And the game performance is about like you'd expect. So Borderlands 3, 7600, 32 gigs of memory, 7700 XT with 12 gigs, 124 FPS, 102 for our 1% lows. Ryzen AI Max 395, 8060S. Remember, this is a 64 gig version, so the GPU's cut down a little bit there on our GMK tech. 84 FPS with 65 for the 1% lows, which again, not bad. Cyberpunk 2077, 88 FPS versus 132. Obviously, the DGPU is better here, even though it is an older DGPU. At 1440p, the DGPU is much more playable on Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty, as one would expect. No surprises there. Borderlands 3, I forgot, 1440p, 86 FPS there, with the discrete GPU, 61 FPS, which is not bad for an APU on the Ryzen AI Max. Now, the Ryzen AI Max is also going to be a little quieter and a little less complicated than the 7700 XT 12 gig. Also got Shadow of the Tomb Raider, just for good measure, 114 FPS versus 192, 1440p, 91 versus 154. With ray tracing, it's kind of an option on the 7700 XT. It's improved since launch day. You gotta give it credit. 128 FPS on our 7700 XT. Digimon Storytime Stranger. It's basically the same performance on both systems because, obviously, 1440p. Your 1% lows are a little worse on the Ryzen AI Max 395 Plus, but I mean, come on. And because it's Steam and because it's AMD, you've got excellent platform support for pretty much all your other games. But remember, if you have a gaming computer, like you could use the 7600X with the 7700 XT GPU as like your main gaming computer, and then you could use a Steam Deck for your living room machine. That's perfectly fine with the dock, Steam in-home streaming with your Steam Deck hooked up to a TV. It's the best of both worlds, and it really economizes parts and everything else. And so that's something you could consider doing versus having a dedicated Steam machine. All right, in our wasteland of not being able to buy parts affordably, doing something like that, even though it's Zen 2, even though it's older, it'll stream 1080p perfectly reasonably from a gaming machine. That may be worth considering, but this is the performance you can expect if you DIY your own Steam machine. Here's our side mission conversation about small form factor. This is kind of a prototype of the new case that Dr. Zaber's been working on. And we've got our sideways power supply. This is a different form factor power supply. And even just things like using a different connector for the power connector, because the standard computer power supply with 3 pins is enormously bulky. This is much smaller, it gives you some more options. But even things like the standoff height here is a non-standard size. And this is a real engineering problem because, okay, you've got a 2-slot GPU, but is it 2 slots? Is it 2.5 slots? Is it 2 1/4 slots? Is it 3 slots? Is it 3.5 slots? You've got a lot of GPUs that are, millimeter by millimeter height by GPU brand. There's not a lot of room in here even for like the backplate. What if the design, you would take the backplate off and thermally connect it to the rest of the case to use the metal case as a heatsink? So I think maybe we'll do an interview with Dr. Zaber and take a look at that. But if that's something you're interested in, definitely engage below and let me know, because I mean, this case looks amazing, but there's not enough standardization across the small form factor parts industry to really use this effectively. They end up wasting space because there's not enough standardization across components. Like you end up with a case that is purpose built for like this specific motherboard and this specific GPU, which is suboptimal because, as we all know, we all like to make choices. You have crazy people like me that are trying to, it's like, oh, how can I use my U.2 Optane in a case like this? You see, and there's a lot of us. The people that are willing to spend money on that sort of thing generally have those kinds of preferences in mind. And where we're going with physical form factors and all of this is, I think, farther away from standards. So, and then it's like you look at the power supply that they're using here. This is actually a standard power supply form factor, more on the OEM side and industrial side, but they've got a standard power supply form factor here with an adapter cable for the power, and even you know, the 12V2 style power connector on the PCB on this particular power supply, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. It's like, oh, we can support this, but then it's also like the non-standard standoff. So I don't know. Check out that video with this, and I want to do a build with this, the prototype, and put it together. But again, limitation 2 GPUs. Maybe Intel's got a prototype GPU. Maybe that'll be handy with something like this. Maybe. I'm on this level 1. Yeah, if you're thinking about building a steam machine, you can build a steam machine out of garbage. You can build a steam machine out of a machine that would otherwise be hucked because somebody thinks that it's useless because it doesn't support Windows. Although those are more expensive than they were 6 months ago, and that really is terrible. But our community is all about this kind of thing. So hang out, let's chat. I'm Wendell, this is level 1. I'm signing out, and I'll see you in the level 1 forums.